Listen to me closely. Some of you are exhausted not because life is hard, but because people are loud in your spirit. You wake up angry. You go to bed frustrated, not because they touched you, but because you let them live rent free in your mind. Let me ask you a question. Why does someone else have the power to steal your peace? Why does their opinion control your mood? Why does their behavior dictate your joy? Today, I came to evict anger. I came to serve notice to offense. I came to teach you how to never be bothered again. If everything can disturb you, then nothing is under your control. Anger is not strength. Reaction is not power. Losing your peace is too expensive a price to pay for people who don't even know who they are. I discovered this truth. The moment you stop reacting, you start ruling. This message is not about being passive. It's about being unshakable. It's about learning how to walk so grounded that chaos can't pull you off center. By the time you leave today, you will know how to stand in a storm and still say, I am not moved. Anger is a signal, not a command. It shows up to tell you that something matters, that a boundary feels crossed, that a value feels threatened, that your spirit has been stirred. But just because anger knocks on the door does not mean you are required to invite it in, seat it at the table, and let it run your house. Feelings were designed to inform you, not to govern you. The danger begins when you confuse awareness with authority. Anger can alert you, but it should never lead you. Too many people believe that if they feel angry, they must express it immediately, as if emotion itself is permission. But emotion without wisdom becomes destruction. Anger unchecked will convince you that urgency equals truth, that volume equals power, and that reaction equals strength. It will rush you into saying things you cannot retrieve, making decisions you cannot undo, and burning bridges you will later need to cross. Anger has no foresight. It only lives in the moment, demanding instant release, regardless of the cost. Anger does not mean you are weak. It means you are human. Even the strongest minds feel it. Even the calmest spirits encounter it. But strength is revealed not in the absence of anger, but in mastery over it. There is a difference between feeling anger and becoming angry. One is an experience. The other is an identity. When you allow anger to become your identity, it begins to speak for you, move you, and represent you in places you were meant to walk with dignity. Anger will tell you that if you don't react, you are losing. But restraint is not defeat. Restraint is strategy. The most dangerous person in any room is not the loudest one, but the one who can feel everything and still choose silence. When you pause, when you breathe, when you allow your mind to catch up with your emotion, you reclaim control. In that pause, anger loses its grip. It can no longer hijack your words, your tone, or your future. Anger often disguises itself as righteousness. It will convince you that you are justified, that you are defending yourself, that you are standing for truth. But many times it is not justice speaking. It is wounded pride. It is unmet expectations. It is unresolved pain. When you recognize this, anger stops being something you fear or suppress and becomes something you observe. And once you can observe it, you can outgrow it. The moment you stop letting anger command you, you begin to lead yourself. You realize that peace is not passivity and calm is not weakness. Calm is clarity. Calm is confidence. Calm is knowing that you do not need to raise your voice to raise your value. Anger may speak loudly, but wisdom speaks last. And when wisdom speaks, anger no longer decides the outcome. You do. What you react to, you hand power to. The moment something provokes an emotional explosion inside you, it has already crossed the boundary between the external world and your inner authority. Reaction is not a small thing. It is a transfer of control. When you react without intention, you are allowing someone else's behavior, words, or attitude to dictate your internal state. That is not influence. That is ownership. And too many people are giving away ownership of their peace to people who haven't earned the right to manage it. Reaction is often mistaken for honesty. People say, that's just how I feel, as if expression alone makes it noble. But reaction is not truth. It is impulse. Impulse does not ask whether the moment deserves your energy. It does not ask whether this battle aligns with your purpose. It simply demands attention now. And whatever demands attention now without permission becomes a thief. It steals focus, clarity, and sometimes years of your life through one unguarded moment. The enemy of peace does not need to destroy your future if it can distract your present. A single reaction can undo months of discipline. One emotional outburst can collapse credibility, damage relationships, and put you in a defensive posture that was never meant to be yours. Reaction makes you explain yourself to people who were never confused. It pulls you down to levels you worked hard to rise above. And once you are there, you realize too late that the cost of reaction was far greater than the relief it promised. When someone knows they can get a reaction out of you, they gain leverage. They may not even be aware of it consciously, but the pattern forms. A word here, a look there, a comment time just right, and suddenly your mood shifts, your energy drops, your focus fractures. You begin living in response mode instead of purpose mode. You wake up not asking what you want to build, but wondering what you will have to defend today. That is not living, that is surviving. Power returns to you the moment you choose not to react. Silence in that moment is not surrender, it is sovereignty. It is you deciding that your emotional economy matters, that not everything deserves a response, and that some battles are won by refusing to step onto the field. When you do not react, you force the other person to sit alone with their behavior. You do not absorb it. You do not amplify it. You let it fall back on them where it belongs. Non-reaction is not numbness. You still feel, you still register the moment, but you filter it through wisdom instead of ego. You decide how much access it gets, how long it stays, and what effect it has. That decision is power. And once you experience the freedom of not being triggered, not being pulled, not being controlled by external noise, you realize something profound. Peace was never taken from you. You were giving it away. Most offense is born not out of cruelty, but out of misaligned expectations. We often get angry not because someone intentionally harmed us, but because they failed to be who we hoped they would be. We expected sensitivity from someone who has never learned empathy. We expected consistency from someone still wrestling with their own instability. We expected depth from someone who only knows survival. When those expectations collide with reality, disappointment turns into offense, and offense quickly becomes anger. Expectations are powerful. They shape how we interpret words, actions, and silence. When expectations are unspoken or unrealistic, they create invisible contracts that the other person never agreed to sign. Then, when they inevitably fail to meet those standards, we accuse them in our hearts of betrayal. But in truth, they never promised what we assumed. Much of our anger is not about what people did, but about what we imagined they should have done. Anger grows strongest when expectation is mixed with attachment. The more you need someone to act a certain way for you to feel whole, respected, or secure, the more power you give them over your emotions. When they fall short, it feels personal, even if their behavior is simply a reflection of their own limitations. You begin to interpret their incapacity as intentional harm. But inability and malice are not the same thing. Many people are not trying to hurt you. They simply do not have what you are asking for. When you expect maturity from someone who is still emotionally undeveloped, you set yourself up for repeated frustration. When you expect loyalty from someone who has never been loyal to themselves, you invite disappointment. When you expect clarity from someone who thrives in confusion, you will always leave the conversation drained. Expectations do not change people. They only expose the gap between who they are and who you want them to be. And that gap is where anger lives. Peace begins when expectations become aligned with reality. This does not mean lowering your standards. It means redirecting them. You stop demanding fruit from barren soil. You stop trying to pull depth from shallow places. You stop asking people to give what they have never possessed. In that shift, something powerful happens. Your anger loses fuel. You no longer take everything personally because you understand that people act from the level of their capacity, not from your worth. When expectations are adjusted, offense loses its grip. You no longer walk into situations hoping people will surprise you with growth. You observe them as they are, not as you wish they were. This does not make you cold. It makes you clear, and clarity is kinder than constant disappointment. You save emotional energy. You protect your peace. You learn to choose where to invest your heart. Once you release unrealistic expectations, anger no longer controls your reactions. You stop being shocked by predictable behavior. You stop reliving the same frustration, different faces. You gain compassion without sacrificing boundaries. And in that balance, you discover a deeper freedom. You are no longer angry at people for being who they have always shown you they are. Peace is not a personality trait that some people are born with and others are denied. It is not reserved for the naturally calm, the emotionally detached, or the spiritually advanced. Peace is a discipline, something you choose repeatedly, especially when chaos is available as an easier option. Anyone can lose control when pressure rises. Discipline is what allows you to remain centered when every part of you wants to react. Peace does not happen by accident. It is practiced in moments that test you. Most people wait for peace to arrive instead of training themselves to maintain it. They believe peace will come when people change, when circumstances improve, or when life finally slows down. But peace that depends on external conditions is fragile. It collapses the moment something goes wrong. A disciplined peace, however, is internal. It is not negotiated with the environment. It is decided within. You do not ask permission to be calm. You claim it as your responsibility. Practicing peace means learning how to pause before you speak, how to breathe before you respond, how to slow your thoughts when emotions try to race ahead. It is choosing clarity over chaos when your nervous system wants release. That choice is rarely comfortable. Chaos feels familiar. Reaction feels satisfying in the moment. Peace feels like restraint, and restraint requires strength. That is why peace is often mistaken for weakness. In reality, it is one of the highest forms of self-control. Discipline means you do not give your emotional energy to every stimulus. You decide what deserves your attention and what does not. You learn to recognize when your peace is being challenged and you intervene before anger takes over. This does not mean you suppress emotions. Suppression creates pressure. Discipline creates space. You allow emotions to pass through you without letting them take control of you. You observe them, process them, and then choose how to act. A disciplined peace changes how you move through life. Conversations feel lighter because you are not bracing for conflict. Decisions feel clearer because they are not fueled by emotion. Your presence becomes stabilizing, not reactive. People notice it, even if they cannot explain it. You are no longer easily pulled into drama because drama feeds on undisciplined emotion. Without your participation, it loses momentum. Peace as a discipline also means consistency. You do not practice calm only when it is convenient. You practice it when you are tired, misunderstood, provoked, or disappointed. Each moment becomes a training ground. Each challenge strengthens your capacity to remain centered. Over time, peace stops feeling forced and starts feeling natural. Not because life became easier, but because you became stronger. When peace is practiced daily, it becomes your default response. Anger still visits, but it no longer moves in. Stress still knocks, but it no longer rearranges your internal order. You begin to trust yourself in difficult moments because you know you will not abandon your values under pressure. That trust is freedom. And that freedom is the reward of disciplining a life that is steady, grounded, and no longer controlled by emotional turbulence. Silence is sometimes the loudest victory because it refuses to participate in chaos. In a world that thrives on reaction, explanation, and constant defense, choosing silence is an act of authority. It is not the absence of strength. It is the presence of control. Silence says, I am not threatened. It says, I know who I am well enough that I do not need to prove it to you. When you remain silent, you deny conflict the fuel it needs to grow. Many arguments are not about truth. They are about ego. They are invitations to step into emotional wrestling matches where no one is listening, only waiting to respond. When you engage, you validate the misunderstanding. You legitimize the noise. Silence disrupts that cycle. It leaves the other person alone with their assumptions, their accusations, and their volume. Without your participation, the drama collapses under its own weight. Silence also protects clarity. Words spoken in emotionally charged moments often betray your true intention. They come out sharper than you mean, heavier than you intend, and once released, they cannot be recalled. Silence gives wisdom time to catch up with emotion. It allows you to separate what you feel from what needs to be said. In that space, you regain control over the narrative of your life instead of handing it to the moment. There is a deep insecurity in the need to explain yourself to everyone. The desire to be understood by people who have already decided to misunderstand you is exhausting. Silence is the moment you realize that not every version of you needs correction. Some people are committed to their perspective, not the truth. Explaining yourself to them does not bring clarity. It only drains your energy. Silence is you choosing preservation over persuasion. Silence is also a boundary. It communicates that access to your thoughts, emotions, and reactions is earned, not automatic. When you stop responding to provocation, you teach people how to treat you. You demonstrate that manipulation, guilt, and pressure will not move you. Over time, those who thrive on reaction will lose interest because silence gives them nothing to work with. Choosing silence does not mean you avoid hard conversations. It means you choose the right time, the right tone, and the right audience. Some conversations deserve words. Others deserve distance. Silence helps you discern the difference. It allows you to respond from intention rather than impulse. And when you do speak, your words carry weight because they are not wasted on noise. There is peace in not having the last word. There is strength in walking away without explaining why. There is freedom in letting your consistency speak louder than your defense. Silence aligns you with your values when the moment tempts you to betray them. It keeps you from shrinking to meet disrespect at its level. When you learn the power of silence, anger loses its stage. Conflict loses its audience. You stop fighting battles that were never meant to be won with words. And in that quiet resolve, you discover a profound truth. You do not need to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes the most decisive victory is simply choosing not to engage. When you truly know who you are, the world loses its ability to shake you. Identity is the anchor of the soul. Without it, every opinion feels like a verdict. Every criticism feels like an attack, and every rejection feels personal. But when your identity is settled, external voices lose their authority. You stop living as a question mark, constantly seeking validation, and start living as a statement. That shift alone dismantles much of the anger that once controlled you. Anger often rises from insecurity. When you are unsure of your worth, you feel the need to defend it. You argue to prove yourself. You react to protect your image. You take things personally because your sense of self is fragile. But when you know who you are, defense becomes unnecessary. You no longer fight for recognition because you are rooted in self-awareness. You are not easily offended because offense requires uncertainty to survive. A grounded identity creates emotional stability. You understand your values, your limits, and your purpose. That clarity acts as a filter. Not every comment passes through. Not every judgment lands. You become selective about what you internalize. You stop measuring yourself by shifting standards and start standing on unshakable principles. When criticism comes, you evaluate it instead of absorbing it. When praise comes, you appreciate it without depending on it. Balance replaces volatility. Knowing who you are also means accepting who you are not. Many people become angry trying to live up to expectations that were never meant for them. They chase approval, comparing themselves to others, constantly feeling behind or inadequate. That internal conflict fuels frustration. But when you accept your unique path, comparison loses its grip. You no longer feel threatened by someone else's success or diminished by their opinion. You recognize that different does not mean deficient. An anchored identity changes how you interpret behavior. You stop assuming every slight is an insult and every disagreement is disrespect. You realize that people's reactions often reflect their own struggles, not your worth. That realization creates compassion without weakness. You can set boundaries without bitterness. You can walk away without anger. You can remain calm because your sense of self is not under negotiation. When identity is strong, peace becomes natural. You are not constantly scanning the room for approval or bracing for offense. You move with confidence, not arrogance. You listen without being threatened. You speak without needing dominance. Even in conflict, you remain composed because you are not fighting to be seen or validated. You already know your value. In that place of self-knowledge, anger loses its leverage. It can no longer manipulate you with fear or pride. You do not erupt because someone challenges you, nor do you shrink because someone dismisses you. You remain steady, grounded, whole. When you know who you are, nothing can shake you because nothing outside of you defines you. You stop giving people the power to name you, move you, or disturb your peace. You stand firm, not because life is gentle, but because your identity is settled. And that settled identity becomes the foundation of an unbothered life. Let me leave you with this. I don't need your approval to stand tall. I don't need your reaction to know my worth. I don't need to raise my voice to prove my strength. I have learned that peace is power and calm is authority. I will not argue with distractions, wrestle with offense, or bleed over opinions. I am rooted, settled, and secure. So go ahead, talk if you must, doubt if you will, misunderstand if you choose. I am not moved. I am not shaken. I am unbothered.